Micron, the maker of basic DRAM chips, the building blocks of all memory.
Everyone talks about Nvidia, by Jensen Huang, of the chips that are changing the world. But while millions of people watched the king of artificial intelligence, another giant was silently printing money. And the most incredible thing? The thing is that this company does not even manufacture processors. It does not design CPUs, it does not design GPUs, it does not even develop artificial intelligence models. And yet, he just released one of the most impressive financial reports Wall Street has seen in years. It's called Micron Technology. And you've probably never heard of it. Just a few years ago, this company was making losses. Analysts doubted its future. His business seemed like one more in a tremendously cyclical industry. Today, it is making tens of billions of dollars. And the most surprising thing is that demand continues to grow. While many companies go out to look for customers, Micron has the opposite problem. It can't make enough product. Imagine opening a bakery and discovering that all the bread you're going to bake for the next year is already sold. That is exactly what Micron is experiencing with one of its star products. Then a question arises. If Nvidia is the brain of artificial intelligence, who is feeding that brain? Because it turns out that a brain without memory is of absolutely no use. That's where Micron comes in. The company that makes the memory that virtually all AI giants need, from Nvidia to the largest data centers on the planet. But what's really incredible is that this story didn't start in Silicon Valley. It didn't start with billions in investment. It started in 1978 in Boise, Idaho, in the basement of a dentist's office. Yes, you read that right. A basement. Very far from California, very far from technological glamour. And from there, they ended up building one of the most important companies of the entire artificial intelligence revolution. How does a company born practically from scratch survive decades of crises, defeated much larger competitors, and today it has Wall Street completely fascinated? Because this is not just the story of a company. It's the story of how to sell your tools during the biggest tech gold rush of the 21st century. And believe me, when you see the numbers, you'll understand why so many investors are talking about Micron. To understand why Micron is worth hundreds of billions of dollars today, first we have to travel almost 50 years back to a place where no one imagined that one of the future giants of semiconductors was being born. When we think of technology companies, we usually imagine Silicon Valley, San Francisco, Palo Alto, garages where Apple or Google were born. But Micron was not born in any of those places. He was born more than 1,000 kilometers away, in a state famous for something very different: the potatoes. Yes, Idaho produces some of the best potatoes in the United States. Not exactly the place where one would expect to find a future semiconductor giant. And yet, that's where it all started. In 1978, 4 entrepreneurs decided to take on an extremely complicated industry. Ward Parkinson, Joe Parkinson, Dennis Wilson, and Doug Pittman. They did not have the backing of a large investment fund. They didn't have futuristic buildings, nor multi-million-dollar laboratories. What they had was an idea and a small rented space. According to the company's own history, the first steps were taken in the basement of a building that also housed a dental office. It's not exactly the glamorous origin one would imagine for a company that today supplies some of the world's largest chip makers. While upstairs someone came out with a filling, down below, they were trying to build the future of computer memory. And there was a small problem. Well, there was actually a huge one. At that moment, the United States was losing ground to Japan. During the 1980s, Japanese companies such as NEC, Toshiba, Hitachi, and Fujitsu dominated the global DRAM memory market. They manufactured faster, cheaper, and with extraordinary quality. Many American companies simply disappeared, or they abandoned the memory business altogether. Imagine competing against someone who sells practically the same product, but cheaper. And also, he has a lot more money than you. Most would have closed their doors. Micron decided to do exactly the opposite. Instead of trying to spend more, they did something much smarter. They became obsessed with efficiency. Reduce waste, improve each process, manufacture more with less, automate everything possible. Every penny mattered. Because in an industry where price is constantly changing, whoever produces cheaper survives. And that mentality ended up becoming the company's DNA. Micron learned something that many competitors never understood. Bad cycles don't last forever, but they only get to the next cycle who survive the previous one. For decades, the memory business was a real roller coaster. There were extraordinary years and disastrous years. When there were plenty of chips on the market, prices were plummeting, profits were disappearing, and many companies went bankrupt. Micron went through that story over and over again. Many believe Micron simply got lucky with the advent of AI, but the reality is very different. The company had been preparing for this moment for almost 50 years. Decades investing, decades surviving, decades perfecting memory making. Until, suddenly, the world needed exactly what Micron had specialized in throughout its history. And this is where the story gets really interesting, because we haven't talked about the product yet. And to understand what Micron makes is to understand why Nvidia, AMD, and practically all the companies that build artificial intelligence servers desperately need this company. The brain begins to process information, but you run out of space to work. Everything freezes. Because it turns out that having the most powerful processor in the world, it is of absolutely no use if you don't have enough memory to feed it. And that, it is precisely Micron's specialty.
When most people hear about artificial intelligence, they immediately think of Nvidia. And that makes sense. Their GPUs are the brains that perform millions of calculations per second. But here's something almost no one mentions. A brain without memory is practically useless. Here's the most important difference. Nvidia, Intel, AMD manufacture the brains. That is, the chips that perform the calculations. Micron, on the other hand, manufactures the memory where those calculations remain available while the processor is working. It's like the difference between a chef and the kitchen. You can hire the best chef on the planet, but if they only have a 10-centimeter cutting board, they won't cook very fast. Micron's first major specialty is DRAM memory. DRAM stands for Dynamic Random Access Memory, but don't worry, you don't need to memorize the name. What's important is understanding what it's for.
DRAM is the computer's workspace. Everything you're using right now, your browser, a video game, an Excel spreadsheet, ChatGPT, all of that is temporarily stored in DRAM, so the processor can access it in nanoseconds. When you turn off your computer, that information disappears. It's extremely fast memory, but temporary. Now, imagine that instead of a person, you have an artificial intelligence with hundreds of billions of parameters trying to answer millions of questions simultaneously. That desktop needs to become gigantic and also much, much faster. Micron's second major line of business is NAND flash memory. This does store information even when you turn off the device. It's the equivalent of an office filing cabinet. Your photos, your videos, your documents, your applications live here, and practically all the content of a modern SSD. Everything we've just explained is important, but it doesn't explain why Wall Street is so obsessed with Micron. The real reason has only 3 letters. HBM stands for High Bandwidth Memory, or simply put, memory specifically designed to power the monsters of artificial intelligence. Let's go back to the desktop example. Imagine that now you not only have a huge desktop, but also that documents arrive at your fingertips 10 times faster. That's exactly what HBM achieves. It doesn't just offer a lot of capacity, it also moves gigantic amounts of information at impressive speeds. Nvidia's most advanced GPUs, the ones that train models like ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude, depend on this memory to operate at peak performance.
Without HBM, those GPUs would spend a large part of their time waiting for data. And when a GPU worth tens of thousands of dollars is waiting, every second costs money. A lot of money. This is where things get complicated. HBM isn't simply faster memory. It's built by stacking multiple layers of memory on top of each other, connected by thousands of tiny vertical interconnects. This design reduces the distance data travels and allows for enormous bandwidth with relatively efficient energy consumption. Manufacturing it requires extraordinary precision. A small defect, and the entire system can become unusable. That's why very few companies in the world master this technology. This means that while dozens of companies compete to manufacture processors, only a handful can supply the most coveted memory on the market. And when demand exploded with artificial intelligence, production capacity simply wasn't enough.
Every time someone uses artificial intelligence, there's a very high probability that behind that response, there's a data center equipped with high-performance GPUs, and alongside them, HBM memory, manufactured by companies like Micron. It's a component that almost no one sees, but without it, the entire system loses speed. And here we see one of the biggest changes in this story. For many years, memory was considered a relatively common product where price was almost everything. But HBM changed the game. It's no longer enough to manufacture millions of chips. They now have to manufacture some of the most complex and valuable chips in the entire industry. And that gave Micron negotiating power that seemed unthinkable just a few years ago. Now that we understand why Micron's product became so important, it's time to talk about the numbers. And believe me, they're so astonishing, they seem like they belong to another company. Because when Wall Street saw the June 2026 fiscal report, it became clear that Micron was no longer a minor player. It had entered on its own merits the group of major players in the artificial intelligence revolution.
So far, we've understood two things. First, that Micron manufactures one of the most important components for artificial intelligence. And second, that very few companies in the world are capable of manufacturing that technology. But all of that doesn't explain why Wall Street practically went crazy on June 24, 2026. The answer lies in a document of just a few pages, their quarterly report. And what that document said was simply staggering. Micron presented its results for the third fiscal quarter of 2026, and practically every figure broke records for the company.
This wasn't just a good quarter. It was a completely extraordinary quarter. Let me translate this. Imagine you sell a pizza for $100. After paying for the ingredients, you still have almost $85 left. That means manufacturing the product costs relatively little compared to the price customers are willing to pay. And that is exactly what was happening with HBM memory. Demand was so strong and supply so limited that prices reached extraordinary levels. To give you an idea, there are S&P 500 companies that take several years to generate a profit like this. Micron achieved it in a single quarter. Investors always ask the same question. That's great what you earned, but what comes next? And that's when the real bombshell dropped. Expected revenue? $50 billion. Yes, you heard right. The company itself said it expected to generate around $50 billion in revenue during the next fiscal quarter, along with a gross margin of nearly 86%.
Analysts expected very good figures. Micron presented even better figures, and that made the market start to reconsider how much the company could really be worth. Now then, where did such growth come from? Did prices simply go up? Not exactly. What happened was much more interesting. Artificial intelligence triggered a global race to build data centers. Every company wanted to install more GPUs, more servers, more training capacity. But there was a problem. They all needed exactly the same type of memory, and only 3 manufacturers could produce it. Demand was growing much faster than manufacturing capacity. And when that happens, customers stop negotiating discounts. They start negotiating who gets the product first.
Micron began signing long-term strategic supply agreements with major customers, securing a portion of future production and providing much greater visibility into its revenue. The company itself highlighted these agreements as one of the key factors behind its record results and its strong outlook for the next quarter. It's a huge change because it reduces uncertainty, and Wall Street loves predictability. Although Micron doesn't always publicly disclose all of its customers' names, it did confirm that its HBM4 memory was already being shipped in volume for a leading customer's platform, and that it had also distributed qualification samples to other major customers. The market assumes that demand is closely tied to new AI platforms from companies like Nvidia and other industry giants. Each new generation of GPUs needs even more memory, faster, more efficient, and more difficult to manufacture. In other words, every technological leap in AI also represents an opportunity for Micron.
But be careful. If the history of semiconductors has taught us anything, it's that no bull market lasts forever. And although Micron is experiencing one of the best periods in its history, risks still exist that could change the landscape. The big question now isn't whether Micron is making a lot of money. That's already been proven. The real question is something else entirely. Can it maintain this pace for the next few years? Or are we witnessing the peak of an extraordinary cycle? And that's precisely the question we'll answer in the last part of this video.
After seeing these numbers, it's easy to think Micron has found a money-printing machine. But if there's one thing the semiconductor industry has demonstrated over the last 4 decades, it's that no leadership is guaranteed forever. And that's precisely where the most interesting part of the story lies. Although Micron is experiencing one of the best periods in its history, it's not alone. Samsung remains the largest memory manufacturer on the planet. It has a gigantic production capacity, billions of dollars to invest, and a vertical integration that very few companies can match. On the other hand, SK Hynix has achieved a very strong position in HBM memory and continues to be one of the leading suppliers for artificial intelligence accelerators. In other words, Micron isn't competing against small companies. It's competing against 2 true heavyweights of the industry, and either of them wants to grab a larger share of this market.
There's another risk that veteran investors know very well. The memory business has always been cyclical. When demand is enormous, everyone invests in building new factories. But those factories take years to become operational. And when they finally do, sometimes the exact opposite happens. There's too much supply, prices fall, and margins begin to squeeze. It's a pattern we've seen several times in the history of the industry. The big question now is whether the artificial intelligence revolution will be big enough to absorb all that new production capacity. And then there's a factor that no company can control on its own: geopolitics. Today, manufacturing chips is no longer just a business. It's also a matter of national security. The United States wants to strengthen its domestic semiconductor production. China seeks to reduce its technological dependence. And countries around the world are spending billions of dollars to attract factories. That means that political decisions, trade restrictions, or international tensions can affect both the supply chain and demand. In such a strategic industry, politics and technology go hand in hand.
If the June 2026 report made one thing clear, it's that Micron is no longer just a memory company. It has become a critical piece of the infrastructure powering artificial intelligence. Every new data center, every more advanced model, every more powerful GPU requires memory that can keep up.
And as AI continues to expand, Micron will have a huge opportunity to keep growing. That doesn't mean the path will be linear. There will be cycles, there will be competition, and there will certainly be better quarters than others. But the company's strategic position today is much stronger than it was just a few years ago. There's a well-known saying in the business world. During a gold rush, the biggest business isn't always digging for gold. It's selling the shovels. All these giants are competing to build the best artificial intelligence, but all of them, without exception, need hardware. They need data centers, they need power, and they need memory.
Micron doesn't compete directly with ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude. Micron sells something even more valuable. It sells a component without which none of them can function at full capacity. And that is an extraordinarily powerful position. Sometimes the companies that change the world aren't the ones that make the most noise. They're the ones that quietly build the foundation upon which everyone else innovates.
Now, I want to hear your opinion. Do you think Micron is just beginning its great growth? Or do you think the market has already priced in too much optimism? And an even more interesting question, if you could only invest in one AI-related company today, would you choose Nvidia? Or would you go for a lesser-known company like Micron? Let me know in the comments. I'll read them all. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Subscribe to discover the companies that are truly shaping Wall Street. And turn on notifications. See you in the next video.